I'm back. I'm doing more videos. Turns out the jump from having 2 kids to having 3 kids is, in a word, intense. Hello and welcome to Elemental Yarn. I've been a little pressed for time and energy lately, but I'm back with another video, and hopefully we're going to start rolling these out a little more frequently from now on. Now today, I'm going to be talking about hit points. And specifically, what they mean in terms of the narrative. There's a lot of confusion out there about what exactly hit points are meant to represent in games such as Dungeons and Dragons. Have you ever played or watched D&D and someone takes some damage? Say they take 12 damage from a sword, and the dungeon master says something like, "The blade cuts deep into your flesh and blood splatters over the wall." And then it keeps happening, and say you've got 90 plus hit points. This happens like 5 or 6 times in a row, and it kind of starts to feel like you shouldn't have any more blood remaining in your body based on the amount of gory description going on. So what's happening is a conflation between hit points and blood points, essentially. I really think that hit points in D&D are not meant to be health points. It's not a measurement of how much blood is remaining in your body or necessarily how beaten and battered you are. No, hit points, all they really mean is your staying ability in combat. How much energy, how much of your class features you have at your disposal to keep fighting in spite of really dangerous attacks. So, for example, let's go back to that sword idea where you get hit by the sword. I think when you get hit by a sword in D&D, it doesn't actually mean it breaks through your armor and skin and flesh and sprays blood everywhere. I think what's actually happening is you parried the blow, but you were knocked back a little bit. Your guard was lowered slightly. If you get hit by a magic spell that does fire damage, well, you're not actually having 3rd degree burns as a result. You had to absorb it with your armor or a piece of your equipment, or you had to catch it on your shield and some of the flames licked around and got in your eyes or something. So basically, whenever you take damage from a source, it's not reducing your vitality. What's happening is you need to explain how this doesn't immediately kill you. If you're a wizard character and you fall from a great height from a tower, well, fall damage caps out at 20d6. So, if you have enough hit points to soak it up, you might be okay. So you have to explain to yourself, how does my frail wizard survive this enormous fall that should be lethal? Well, the answer isn't that they have enough blood. It's not that a 20th level wizard has more blood in their body than a 1st level wizard. It's that they have more resources at their disposal. So even if you don't use a spell slot or a class feature or anything, you need to come up with a reason using your class and features and the narrative of the situation for why that doesn't immediately kill you. Maybe it means that you summon a bunch of membranes of fabric to kind of slow your descent, slow your fall to make sure it doesn't immediately kill you. Or maybe it means that you summon some sort of divine aid to grant you wings for just a split second to slow your descent enough that you don't immediately die. Basically, every time you take damage, it's a negotiation of, why doesn't this immediately kill me? If a human gets clobbered by a great club from an ogre, they're dead. So when your character gets hit by a great club, they should also be dead, but that's because, again, you're not actually being hit. What's happening is the ogre's great club comes smashing in and you just barely dodge to the side. So the thing is, although this is the model that I believe makes by far the most sense, it's not very intuitive. we're sort of conditioned to believe that hit points equals health points. It's sort of ingrained in our society. How many video games have you played, like Diablo, where you drink a health potion and it restores your vitality and you can see a little blood spray come out of your character whenever you get hit by something. But D&D, I don't think is meant to represent that. So if you're playing D&D or Pathfinder or something similar, my advice to you is keep this in mind. Whenever any character takes any amount of damage, if it doesn't drop them to 0 hit points, or if it's not a critical hit, it's basically a negotiation of why they didn't immediately die, and it relies on that character's unique abilities. If it's a monster that takes damage, that monster will use its unique abilities to prevent itself from dying from this hit. If it's a player character, same thing. So if you're just looking for some awesome DMing advice for D&D, then there you go. There you have it. This will help your combats make a lot more sense in terms of the narrative and give you some cool role-playing moments for the characters. But now I'm going to go into how my game does it. Yes, I am still very much working on my game. Although the progress of videos has slowed quite a bit, the progress on game design and development hasn't slacked nearly as much, we'll say. So the way it works in my game, in Ambition, or Tides of Ambition, right now the name is actually a little bit up in the air again, but Ambition is in the name, that's pretty much here to stay. In Ambition, you don't have hit points. We're gonna try and make this more intuitive. So the way it works is you do have a vitality stat, and this is based on and derived from your strength and willpower attributes, kind of half and half. So remember, in my game, your attributes are defined by die sizes rather than scores and modifiers and values. So for example, you might have a strength die of D8 and a willpower die of D4. In that case, your vitality is actually going to be half of each of those dice added together. So in that example, your strength is a D8, half of that is 4, and your willpower is a D4, half of that is 2. Well, we get 4 plus 2 is 6. So that's your vitality. You have a vitality of 6. And keep in mind, in this game, 1 point of damage or anything is going to be a lot more impactful than in games like D&D and Pathfinder, where you can have a monster that has 300 plus hit points. We're not getting that granular here. We're going to try and keep it simple, but still robust and mechanically interesting. So 1 damage is always going to be mechanically interesting. In fact, a lot of enemies you can defeat by just dealing 1 damage to them. Okay, so vitality. This actually is your character's physical well-being and staying power. You can incorporate elements of your unique abilities and effects and everything like that, but it's actually more closely meant to represent, like I said, your physical well-being, how tough you are, how sturdy you are, how much abuse you can take before you're knocked unconscious. But the thing is, damage is not the only thing that can affect your vitality. There are 2 things. There's stress and there's damage. Stress is basically what would happen to your character in D&D whenever you take damage that doesn't bring you to 0 and isn't a critical hit. So if you take stress, that means that's the glancing blow. That means you're getting distracted. That means your guard is being lowered slightly. And damage actually is harm. It's actually physical damage. It's actually damaging your body, or sometimes your mind, but usually your body. So this distinction is incredibly valuable because it gives us 2 different resources that both tick against the same clock, but in different ways. So if you have a vitality of 6, then that means you can have up to 6 stress and damage combined. Obviously, if you have 6 damage, you'll be knocked unconscious and you have a risk of dying. If you have, say, 1 or 2 damage or even 5 damage, and the rest of your vitality is filled up with stress, what that means is you become vulnerable, which is a status effect in my game, which basically means you have disadvantage on everything until you remove stress. Removing stress is very easy to do. In fact, you can remove 1 stress as a maneuver on your turn. If you use your entire action to remove stress using the recover action, you get to roll using your willpower and stamina to see how much stress you can remove. Potentially all of it, all at once. And if a combat ends, then all your stress goes away pretty much immediately. No need to worry about taking any kind of rest or anything. Once combat ends, remove all your stress. Damage will stick around for a lot longer. You'll have to heal damage by doing stuff like treating wounds and resting overnight, or certain magic or certain items. Basically, it's a little harder to pull off. Removing stress can be done like that. Damage is trickier. So what does this mean for combat? Well, basically, if you're attacking an enemy in a combat, all your allies are attacking an enemy, then one of your hits, if you actually hit it with an attack, might deal 1 or 2 damage. Or there's lots of options to do an attack that deals stress rather than damage, and you can often deal more stress and more reliably than damage. And why is this? Well, because stress is easier to inflict and makes a creature vulnerable, that opens them up to be more easily hit by an attack that deals damage. So basically, if you're all fighting an ogre, let's go back to the ogre example. You're all fighting an ogre. Well, everyone could try and go for the damaging hits. Okay, I'm gonna roll to try and damage it. Okay, you might succeed. It's a pretty big monster, so it's got a decent strength. It's gonna try and resist you and throw off your attacks and everything. But you might get in a hit. If you're a really talented fighter, you could probably get in that hit and do 1 damage. Or you could do what's called the harry action, which is if you succeed, you deal 2 stress, or if you fail, you still deal 1 stress. So in this way, you're distracting the creature. You're keeping it off its guard. You're pressing it for weaknesses. And if multiple people do this, it's gonna pretty quickly become vulnerable, which means any attacks while it's vulnerable are made with advantage against it, which means they're much more likely to connect and deal that juicy damage. So this really incentivizes players to work together and think strategically, because there's multiple avenues of victory. There's not just a bag of hit points, you gotta hit it until it dies. It's actually a little bit of a risk reward. Do you wanna try and get that juicy damage hit, or do you wanna soften them up so that someone else can come in and do it for you more easily? The other really nice thing about stress as a resource is that that's kind of the equivalent of fatigue in combat. So that's a really great resource to have as a cost for certain powerful abilities. So for example, if you've got a warrior who wants to unleash a devastating attack and attack 5 adjacent enemies with 1 giant cleave of their weapon, well, you can do that and just have it incur a cost of taking 1 or 2 or even 3 stress if it's a particularly bombastic. All kinds of character options and monster options can rely on this resource to allow them to do cool things at the risk of making yourself a little bit more vulnerable. So again, this comes into that risk reward. It's not just a pool of stamina points that you have. This actually impacts your vitality. All right, and that's pretty much all I have to say on that topic for today. Please comment down below. Let me know if you agree with my assessment of hit points, or if I'm wrong, please tell me in excruciating detail. I'd love to read it. Let me know what you think of my vitality system with stress and damage. And let me know what else you'd like to see about my game in the future. I am still working on the version 2 of my playtest document, which notably will include origins and classes, which are 2 things that were very notably absent from the last version. So look forward to that. Hopefully I'll have it done in the next couple weeks. We'll see how it goes. I'm actually moving right now. That's why my shelf back here is a little bit more empty than normal. Preparing for a big move, but progress maintains. Oh, and also as a side note, I actually discovered this really great website called playroll.com. I'll link it down in the description, but it's actually a really cool service that allows you to kind of host all kinds of character sheets and templates and games on it. It's got a lot of games loaded up in there. a lot of user-made templates for things. So I actually made a template for my character sheet in playroll.com. Just make an account, register, it's all free, and then search for Ambition, and you should see a template in there called Ambition V1. And you can load that up. And I think I spent a couple days on it. I think it's pretty much the best I can make it. The only thing that doesn't work as much as I'd like it to is the condition track. So that part's a little janky, but overall, I think it's really cool. So if you want to try out my game, then that's a great way to kind of experiment with it and tool around with it. Let me know what you think about that. All right, I'm going to cut off the video there before I ramble for another hour and a half. Thank you so much for watching. This has been Elemental Yarn, and I'll see you later.